Hello everyone and welcome to another Top 5 Records video. And today I'm going to be doing one of the biggest comparisons that I've ever done. Why is it a big comparison? Well, I'm going to be comparing the classic records Bernie Grundman mastered Led Zeppelin II with a first US so-called hot mix by Robert Ludwig of Led Zeppelin II. Which pressing plant? This is the Presswell copy. Now, why is this a big comparison? Because basically, online on forums, I see a lot of people discussing which one is better. And why does the discussion go on and on? Because both these records can be really valuable. Actually, they are pretty valuable. For example, this classic records pressing from 2005 at the moment goes for between 350 and 400 euros on Discogs, which is an insane amount of money, but it gets even worse. The Led Zeppelin II can go for even more. I've seen two at a record fair. I've only seen two in the wild in Europe. In America, you can be more lucky, but in Europe they are very rare to find because this was a mix that was pulled from the record shops. Um, their engineer Eddie Kramer and the mastering engineer Robert Ludwig, together with the manager of Led Zeppelin, decided to make a beautiful, brilliant audiophile hot mix for this album. Now, they even went over to test it at the house of Paul Rothchild, the producer of The Doors, because he had an audiophile system, and they were all blown away by the mastering job. Now, the manager of Led Zeppelin put pressure on three record plants to press that specific mastering and also press it on the finest vinyl they had, because there were three different levels in quality of vinyl. Namely, the best was kept for the classical music, the mediocre one for jazz, and the worst for pop and rock. And the manager put pressure on them to press it on their finest quality of vinyl. This got the legendary hot mix of Led Zeppelin II. And the moment the daughter of the president of Atlantic Records took this record with her to school, they had a very cheap record player. The record skipped because the dynamic was too heavy for the cheap record player. Now, the president got mad and pulled this mastering and got a very flat, horrible mix in return. But this specific one, the Robert Ludwig Led Zeppelin II, is notorious. Yet Classic Records is also notorious, well known, of course. Is The Classic Records is also famous because this was a audiophile company that hired the best mastering engineers, mostly Bernie Grundman, and they took great care of getting the best pressings out there. And this was, I believe, the last time that Jimmy Page allowed access to the master tapes. Something like that, because Jimmy Page has the idea that his new digital versions are the ultimate versions. Well, do fans disagree? So, not very often um, do you find one of these in the wild. And the last time I found one, it was 1,700 euros. The time before that, 700 euros. So prices are rising very fast here in Europe. So what about a comparison? Now, without further ado, I'll start off. I do a track by track comparison because usually I just go through it more easily, but I did a track by track comparison. First of all, Whole Lotta Love on the classic records. Um, I measured on my standard a level of volume on my receiver that this one goes between 80 decibels and 88 decibels. It has great dynamic. In the bridge, I measured about 62 decibel. This sounds beautiful, detailed, very clean. There's a great presence. First thing I did notice though is, because, well, honestly, I was more accustomed to the Bob Ludwig before listening to this one, before I went to the A and B. And I also, before I listened to the Bob Ludwig, I had a Red Plum, which I really loved. And it sounds brilliant. It sounds gorgeous. But the first thing I thought, oh, might lack a bit drum and bass perhaps on Whole Lotta Love. Now, listening to Whole Lotta Love on the Robert Ludwig pressing, I didn't change the button of the volume, and it measured between 82 and 87 decibels. And though that might indicate that the dynamic here is a little bit lower than on the other one, when we go to the bridge, I measured that it was about 60 decibels, so it goes even lower in volume. Now, honestly, experience-wise, I do not experience a lot of difference in the dynamics here. Although later on, this one even goes near the end to 92 decibels, where I noticed that the classic records would hit about 89 decibels. But you know, what does it say? Well, it says what it says. Dynamic-wise, both sound a lot alike. And my first impression is that during the mastering of the classic records one, Bernie Grundman may have used the Bob Ludwig pressing as a reference, because there are a lot of similar ideas about the dynamics, about the way it should sound. But the first things that I noticed on Whole Lotta Love is the bass guitar is a lot more present here. The vocal seems to have a bit more bite and a bit more harshness. Dare I even suggest I hear a little bit more detail in the vocal. The vocal is definitely fresher. Good dynamics. I hear a harsher and fresher, perhaps even slightly more detailed sound on the Bob Ludwig. Most noticeable though is the drums, the presence of the drums, both in the high and in the lower frequencies. The guitar has more bite on Whole Lotta Love. Must say though, in this case we are comparing two brilliant pressings. Both of them are brilliant pressings, so I am nitpicking here. But for Whole Lotta Love, the Bob Ludwig one definitely has an edgier sound. Now, I'm moving toward what is and what should never be. I made some notes here. I usually do everything out of my head, but I thought, in this case, because we're talking about such expensive pressings, I want to be as nuanced and detailed as possible, because you might be wondering which one am I going to buy, and then we're talking about hundreds and hundreds, even perhaps even thousands of euros or dollars before you buy one. On the classic records, the definition on Robert Plant's voice is stunning. First thing I notice on the song. Then I go to the Bob Ludwig pressing. Plant's voice sounds a tad bit warmer. The bass guitar has more presence. Drums have a bit more punch. I have the idea that I hear a little bit more in the high, both drum-wise as on the backing vocals. I noticed more of the backing vocals during the song. Then we go towards the Lemon song. The classic records stereo image with guitar and the drums in the opening is spectacular. It really is gorgeous. I do feel the urge though to really give this one a bit more volume, as if it doesn't hit me enough. Though the decibels are between 73 and 80, sometimes 84 at most. Well, that is also got to do with preference. So that's why I'm sharing it. I want to be as detailed and nuanced as possible. I try to not go beyond the 80, 85. Definitely not beyond 90. Fragile ears. I do not want to end up with a buzz in my ear. Now, going to the Bob Ludwig on the Lemon song. The guitar opening also has the same spectacular stereo image. I noticed the gong, is that the right English word? The gong on the right channel for the first time though, but that also might have to do with the A-B comparing, and that you just pick up certain differences over a time. I prefer the warmth of the guitar here. On both versions, Robert Plant's vocals seem to be mixed more to the back, and on this one the drums sound stellar. And the bass guitar has more body too. There is some fantastic punch in the bass here. Rather comparable dynamics again. And then I'm moving towards Thank You. I love that song. I used to play that song with my band. Here, the classic records one. Beautifully defined here. First time I hear a slight tape hiss on this pressing. Why am I noticing that? The other one, the Bob Ludwig one, and that might be very important if for the collectors out there. The other one is VG minus, so there are some scratches, there are some pops and clicks. This one is of course near mint because it's not an old pressing and it's been bought by audiophiles. So if you find one, most of the time they're in pretty excellent condition. And this was the first time I hear a little bit of hiss. I guess it's tape hiss, but it does state something about the cleanliness of this record. I do not, however, until this point, have problems with the pops and the clicks on the Bob Ludwig one, because basically it just loud pressed, it's solid sound. I'm not bothered by it. If you are bothered though, the classic records is definitely something to keep in mind. Yeah, guitar and vocals here sound stunning on the classic records one. In the chorus, the sound gets slightly muddier, just slightly muddier. Not saying that that has to do with the pressing, however, because I'm comparing it to the Bob Ludwig. Again, more bass and drums. It gives it a lot more punch. Thank You has a lot more punch here. The voice is spectacular here as well. Also a little bit more of a muddy sound, and it starts here on the pre-chorus already. Though the chorus itself seems to be slightly better, still a little bit muddy than the classic records one, but on both pressings I am nitpicking here. I do wonder though, is that something that's already in the tape? Obviously there's something with the tape at that moment. Is there a certain deterioration? Not too sure. Yet again, we're talking about nitpicking here. Going to the other side, Heartbreaker. I love the sound of the guitar here and the way the hi-hats sound here. Again, gorgeous detail, just as with all the other songs. Then, moving towards the Bob Ludwig pressing. The guitar has a much heavier, fuller, and more bass-carrying sound here. The drums sound tight as well, but the balance is not the same as on the rest of the record. Or the classic records one, actually. As if they chose to have more low frequency on this one. Plant's voice is also, it has a lot more body. Almost seems louder. I have the idea that I hear more definition and reverb and distortion on the classic records. On this one, the Bob Ludwig one, it sounds a bit fuller. Living, Loving, Made. Classic records, nice. Sounds nice, but the sound is very bright. And that is something that I noticed during the comparison. I had the idea that during the development of this album, the sound of the classic records one becomes a little bit brighter. Nevertheless, this might also have to do with the fact that doing A-B constantly, the focus on the differences might be emotionally enlarged, because this has always had the reputation of being brighter. For my belief, on Living, Loving, Made, I got the sense, oh yeah, now it gets a bit too bright for me. But again, that might be because I'm very much focusing on the differences here. Now, going to the Bob Ludwig one, this is another song where the difference in brightness is really audible. The pressing sounds a lot more natural. The Bob Ludwig one is a lot more like a very good sounding late 60s, early 70s hard rock recording. It refers to other American pressings with a very natural sound. The classic records loses body and punch in its brightness on Living, Loving, Made. Most notable here. Then, Ramble On. I love the clarity and the tapping on the left channel and the acoustic guitar on the right. It's very clear, very detailed. I would actually be surprised. I'm reading my notes aloud. I would be surprised if the Bob Ludwig has the same clarity on this song, on Ramble On. Now, getting to the Bob Ludwig one, indeed, this one has slightly less clarity on Ramble On. Though the overall difference is that the classic records one is a bit brighter. Robert Plant sounds absolutely different here. He has more body on the Bob Ludwig one. There's more definition in his voice. There's more of a sense of mystique to his voice as well. On the classic records one, it seems to be put slightly to the back. Though, of course, they did not do mixing. I think it's got to do with equalizing choices. Then going to Moby Dick. Again, on the Bob Ludwig, gorgeous. On the Bob Ludwig, on the classic records one, again, gorgeous detail on Moby Dick. But going from this song, from the classic records, to the Bob Ludwig has more detail. There's more body, it has more punch. I hear much more distinct sounds of, for example, the cowbell that you hear in this song. It is less bright, it is less flat, it's better defined, and sounds as if the sound is more finished and direct and distinct. This is a song in which the quality in definition becomes very clear to me. Because of all the different percussion sounds, this is the one that shows the distinct definition, difference, and detail. Because drums can be sometimes the toughest instrument to record and to press, because you have very high frequencies, you have very low frequencies. All of that is much more present on the Bob Ludwig one. Also, the distinct differences in the sounds of all the different, how do you say it in English? Drums, all the different, all the different sounds of all these different percussion elements. They are distinctively different. And although I do not find the right English words for them, it is audible on such a drum song. And boy, oh boy, does the detail of the Bob Ludwig one nail it here. Then, Good Times, Bad Times. Again, the classic records sounds good, very detailed, beautiful. But Good Times, Bad Times, there's more body on the vocals, more body on the beautiful harmonica here, and on the bass, of course. So, my final conclusion. I knew this. I thought going into this might be a tough competition, because this is VG minus, this is near mint minus, and a lot of praise has been given to the classic records. Now, the classic records comes second for me, but it is a very it has a lot of pride in being second here, because this is one of the best records in my collection. And I didn't even compare it to a Monarch, because supposedly the Monarch pressing of this sounds even better. Same mastering, just a different pressing plant with a different quality of pressing. Now, both of them, the difference with a Red Plum is incredible. And I love the first UK Red Plum already. So we are talking about the regions of brilliant audiophile pressings here. But though I suspected that this might have been a tie, and it may be, for me, depending on the day and the mood, which one I would like to play, I really have to give this the second place. Nothing, really nothing beats this one, even though it is VG minus. The Bob Ludwig pressing is astonishing. And this, for me, starts the hunt to go down and find a Monarch pressing, because I want to do the same comparison with a Monarch pressing. And actually, what I'm hoping for is that Analog Productions, who bought the rights to the classic records masterings and is now working on an Atlantic 75 series in which they do 45 RPM releases of classic albums from Atlantic, I truly hope that they will release Led Zeppelin 1, 2, 3, 4 in the Bernie Grundman masterings. Is that possible? I think it has to do with what Jimmy Page decides to do, because Analog Productions has it there, Atlantic Records wants to join in, and if they do, I don't even think we're going to get normal 45 RPM Atlantic 75 pressings. I think we will get UHQRs, because those will be the biggest titles Analog Productions can release at this moment in time. So I'm really curious, and I'm curious if anyone else did the comparison. What are your thoughts? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Leave a comment below, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.